Hello and welcome to IndieSider, where I play indie games and then interview the developer. My name is Ken Gagney, your host, and this week I'm playing Lumo, which recently released for PS4, Xbox One, and Vita, and Steam, PC, Mac, and Linux. Lumo is an isometric puzzle game, sort of a platform puzzler, in the style of Equinox or Solstice, if you ever played those games in the United States. Over in the UK on the ZX Spectrum, or the Amstrad CPC, you might have played games like Head Over Heels, or a variety of other titles that I've never played. But let's check it out. We're going to start a new game. Let's go with Adventure, which has infinite lives, map, and save game. Old school, you do it all in one sitting. And finite lives. Ooh, that's tough. Let's go with save slot number 2, so that I'm not erasing my previous game, which I've actually spent quite a bit of time on. Let's see, binary male or female, and color. Let's go with a pink boy, just to mix things up. Anyway. And then, like I said, this is isometric, so the view is sort of a diagonal. So right now, if I push up, I go up and to the left. If I push down, I go down and to the right. And if you hold the controller sideways, or sort of at an angle, that makes perfect sense. That's not really how I hold a controller, so I'm going to go with this sort of hybrid, which means I, always have to be pushing two directions, because the game takes place at the diagonal. So the game opens up with you as a young man in the real world, and you're just running around, and there's an arcade here with some games. Yay, let's go check them out. Look at all the old computers, look at all the old cartridges, look at the old coin ops. Uh-oh, what's going on here? Spec Eye is sparking, and I just got troned. Aw, yeah. So now I'm in the game, as EA would say. And this is how the game begins. I'm this little fuzzball, this mage-like character, perhaps from the original Final Fantasy, except pink, with a nice big hat. And off I go. So it is a series of discrete rooms that you are tasked with puzzling your way through. Can't really jump much right now. You can see how far I can jump. I also can't rotate the camera more than you can see right there, which is not very much. Now, the isometric games can be challenging because of a lack of depth perception. Sometimes it's hard to tell where exactly the tiles are that you're trying to jump onto. Whoa! Now, obviously this is not safe, so I'm just going to slowly eke my way around it here, and hopefully not get too crispy. But if I do die, the room simply resets and I go back to the beginning. Now there's a rubber ducky. He's the one. He makes bath times so much fun. You'll find out why he's there momentarily. Not all rooms have puzzles. Sometimes they are just connectors like that. If I push my touchpad there, I get that screen. If I push options, I get that. If I push, there's a map around here somewhere. I'll figure it out later. Let's see. Oh, now here's a platform. It goes up, it goes down. I'm just going to hop on here. Now this game was developed by Mr. Gareth Noyce of AAA over in Finland. Well, I'll be speaking with him momentarily. Ooh, now see, these are the kinds of tiles I meant. Where exactly do they connect? Well, there's a shadow right beneath me. You can see that moving on the ground down there. No matter what is beneath me, I will cast a shadow, so that helps you sort of plot where you are in relation to other things. Now, Mr. Gareth Noyce is a veteran of the AAA industry. He has worked on such games as Crackdown, Black Hawk Down, and Fable 2. In 2014, he departed from the AAA industry with the intention of developing his own indie game, and Lumo is that result. I played this at PAX East 2016. Actually, I saw it rather than played it, and very much wanted to get my hands on it. Whoa! So there's a little switch here that I pushed, and that causes this platform to go up and down, and now I can go up there and get it. Get it. And bam! I'm a jumper now. Whoa! Alright, look at me jumping. And now I can, whoops, go back in this room by mistake. Now I can get that little squeaky duck and bounce off it back onto here. You also notice that the platforms have changed a bit. Now they require that I jump. They're testing my new abilities, and hey, I can make that jump now. Yeah! So the rubber duckies are just sort of a little bonus to see if you can collect them all. There is 32 of them. There are 32 of them. And there are a whole bunch of other secrets in this game, some of which I am about to show you, actually. Mr. Gareth Noyce also has his own YouTube series of director's commentary on this game, which is kind of cool. It's kind of like IndieSider, but without the host, me. It's just him by himself. Whoa! And he's been releasing those on a weekly series. There is a link in the show notes. You can find that in the description for this YouTube video or at IndieSider.net/45, because this is episode number 45, released on Wednesday, June 15th. Let's see, what have I got here? Now see, this is the little booklet that tells me how many rubber duckies I have found, as well as audio cassettes and other items. Now I need to get a key for that room, and this is the way back to the beginning, which, as you know, is a dead end because we started there. But look at this, hidden room. Oh my gosh, got it. Sweet. And I believe there's more to this room than meets the eye. I saw somebody else playing this on YouTube, and there appeared to be another hidden area. Can I perhaps actually reenact their magic? Nope. Well, there is one around here somewhere as a shortcut. But I'm going to go get that key, and while I do so, I'll be speaking with Gareth Noyce of AAA. If you want to listen to just the audio of the interview without the gameplay, you can do that at IndieSider.net/45. There's an audio podcast that you can subscribe to on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and now Google Play Music, brand new, just as of earlier this year. So thanks so much for listening to IndieSider. If you want to recommend a game for a future episode, hit me up on Twitter at Gamebits. In the meantime, here's the interview. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with the founder of AAA, the developer of Lumo, that being Mr. Gareth Noyce. Hello, Gareth.
Hello, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. How are you, sir?
I'm good, in glorious sunshine and lovely summer weather over here.
Calling all the way from Finland, are you?
Yep, Helsinki.
Now, that's not where you're natively from, is it?
No, so I was born in Southampton in the UK, which is, right on the south coast, about an hour outside of London. So south of England is my birthplace, but I've lived in a few places. I spent 7 or 8 years up in Dundee in Scotland before coming to Finland, so I've travelled around a little bit.
So I understand Finland is a hotbed for mobile app development?
Helsinki certainly is, yeah. We've obviously got Supercell down the road. There's Next Games, Playraven, Rovio. There's a lot of big hitters in town. Tampera's got a mixed colossal order, did City Skylines just up the road. There's a few smaller mobile studios up there. So there's a pretty vibrant games industry. Housemarque, Frozen Byte on the console PC side. It's obviously smaller than the UK and in many senses younger, but it's a very sort of busy, friendly place to be a game developer.
Oh, then you're in good company then.
Yeah, it's very, very nice over here.
So Lumo is a game I first became aware of when I saw it at PAX East 2016 in Boston, and in fact I didn't get my hands on it at that time because the line to play the game was so long.
Oh, that's good news. I wasn't actually there, so I saw a few photos from the event. But yeah, that was the first time it had been shown publicly in the States.
It was a great debut, and even though I didn't get my hands on it, I immediately went home and tweeted that it's one of the games I need to get my hands on because it looked so much fun and so evocative of the games I grew up with, like, of course, Equinox and Solstice.
Yes, those are the 2 touch points, certainly for the American side. We had a lot more in Europe, particularly on the 8-bit computers, but I don't think you had very many on the Apple II, just a couple on the Commodore 64 and Atari.
That sounds about right. Now, this game, of course, employs an isometric view, which can create some challenges for the player in the depth perception and the way it approaches 3D, and not really knowing exactly where the tiles are as you're jumping onto them. What are the advantages to that sort of view that made you want to create a game using that perspective?
There aren't any advantages. People haven't made isometric games, for 9 or 10 years. I think there's one that I know of that was about 2006 maybe. And before that, really it's a pseudo 3D presentation for low power computers such as the Spectrum or the Amstrad, Commodore 64, the Nintendo NES, because they could do limited 3D, but probably at about 5 frames a second, and they certainly can present this kind of world to the player. So it was just a way of actually, presenting space that kind of made sense. But as a genre, particularly in the European and certainly the British markets, we had a lot of these games, starting with Ultimate Play the Game, Night Law, Attic Attack, Alienate. They started off with this filmation engine, and that spurred a lot of other developers, Amaroon and Max Headroom. There was a lot of isometric games. The first game that I bought was a game called Head Over Heels by John Rittman and Bernie Drummond. It was also isometric, and it was widely regarded as being, the best 8-bit isometric game, certainly through the 80s. And I had a big passion for that genre. We used to call it the arcade adventure. Equinox is basically the last big commercial isometric game that I can think of, and that was the Super Nintendo. So I kind of like the circularity of going back and having my first solo game, be the same genre of the first game that I bought and fell in love with. And it was a way of, doing something a little bit different for my first solo outing, standing out from the crowd. It does offer you a few things from a game design point of view, but most of them are disadvantages. You're constantly spending your time trying to make the rooms, fairly readable because of what you say. The isometric perspective takes a little bit of getting used to. Sometimes you can't see if a platform, is close to the camera or far away from the camera. So I ended up actually avoiding nearly all of those problems. Some people are still struggling with some rooms, but I very, very rarely have any kind of floating platforms near the camera that would look like they're, at the back of the room if you were reading the room wrong. So if anything, it's probably more difficult than, outright advantageous. But it does offer a unique look, and it's a good throwback to a genre of game that used to be incredibly popular that we don't make anymore because we don't need to. And that offers interesting kind of playability and game mechanics, which I really have wanted to explore since I was a kid. So
yeah, you said that you created Lumo from your memories of playing games like Head Over Heels and Equinox, as opposed to actually going back and playing those games hands-on and trying to recreate the experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the push to do Lumo actually came from Steve Pickford, who was the graphic artist of Equinox. We were chatting over Twitter, and we were watching speedruns of Equinox, which kind of started the conversation. I can also remember Equinox pretty well. I spent a whole summer basically just trying to beat it, and it's an incredibly difficult game. I don't know if you remember playing it.
Oh, I do.
And I did beat it once, so I kind of knew most of that. Head Over Heels I probably could walk straight through now and complete. I can basically remember, most of it. What I wanted to be conscious of, though, was I didn't want to wholesale lift, room layouts or map design or key mechanics. I wanted Lumo to really just, kind of grow organically. And the thing for me is I wanted to get across this feeling that I had when I was a kid. So Lumo religiously sticks to the template of the religious game, the original games. It's, discrete rooms, very limited persistence between the rooms. Rooms will reset, if you go in and out of them. A heavy emphasis on exploration, but also trying not to become a Zelda dungeon. Even though I can have bigger rooms and I can do certain things, it would be very easy to become this kind of item lock key, push secret tunnel type design layout that any Zelda dungeon kind of employs, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to really modernize the original template, the original genre, the original games. But to do that, I didn't really want to be encumbered by, going back, studying those games, pulling out specific things from them, because I didn't really want to rip them off. I wanted Lumo to have its own personality. The only thing I was probably more conscious of was literally just avoiding that track of becoming Zelda. That was the thing I had to stay more clear of, because I was actually playing Zelda games like the new 3DS one whilst I was making Lumo, and it's so easy to just go, oh, that's quite good, I'll use that, or I'll do that, and it's like, I'm trying to force myself not to wholesale borrow other people's things and just kind of do my own thing. So yeah, very consciously tried to avoid playing the original games, but to be fair, I pretty much know them off by heart anyway.
Have you since gone back and replayed Equinox or Solstice or head over heels to see if your memories were accurate and if you were accurately inspired?
No, not really. I've listened to the feedback from others, and they, certainly people my age who remember those games, a lot of people saying that, this is completely nailed, the original thing. There's a lot of people, well, not a lot, there's a few people kind of frustrated with, why has he stuck to this old template and stuff. So again, that's kind of ratification that I've done it right. I did, we had the rare replay on Xbox One, so I did introduce my girlfriend to Night Law and stuff. But no, I've played so much of them. The only one I'm tempted to actually go back and have a quick play of now is Monster Max, which was John Rittman and Bernie Drummond's last isometric game. That was on the Game Boy, normal Game Boy, I think. I haven't played that for a very long time, and I've been talking about that quite a lot on Twitter, so I was quite tempted to sort of go back to that. But no, the others I've purposefully just left. I've good memories of them.
And there are a lot of other classic games that inspired this. I've seen references or allusions to games like Pac-Man and I think Battletoads, but the one that I'm most interested in, early on in the game, there is an elevator that brings you up to sort of a techno land, and there's this amazing music playing during the elevator ride. What is the story behind that music?
So there's multiple things going on there. On the wall there's a picture of a Commodore 64 game called Chimera, which was developed by a guy called Shahid Ahmed, who used to work at PlayStation and was kind of like an indie evangelist, but he's now gone solo and is working on his own game. That techno wonderland you're referring to is kind of like my jokey rendition of one of the rooms from Chimera. Now, the original 8-bit game was just this bright yellow pixel art, so I've kind of just done a metallic sort of version of that, squeezed the toasters and the spanner in, and the little robot that's walking around is my incredibly poor rendition of the main player character from Chimera, which I literally spent about 10 minutes making. So that's that kind of part. The lift going up to it, the music's from a magazine called Your Sinclair, which was one of the 3 big popular Spectrum magazines in the UK. I guess it was kind of the same in the US, but we had a lot of personality in our magazines, particularly in the early 80s, and that was still the stage where the reviewers could review every single game that came out in a month, so they were real sort of kind of taste setters for the readers. And as a joke, one of many that they kind of did, they put in a sort of Rick Astley Mickey Takes song on the B-side of a cover-mounted cassette that they had on the magazine. And you guys predominantly used discs, but we had literally, cassette tapes for our games because it was cheaper. So this music was on the B-side, and I used to have it as a ringtone. It's a really in-joke for that magazine, but it kind of ran for a while. It even got played once on national radio because someone mistook it for a real song. So there was the sort of cult thing about it. I really, really wanted to use it for the Greenlight video because I knew, it's probably a joke only a few thousand people would ever get, but I knew for those people it would just completely, nail the sort of thing that I was doing. And I managed to track David Wilson down. Funnily enough, he's also working at Sony, and just basically begged him, can I use this music? Can I use this music? And he'd sort of forgotten all about it, and was just like, yeah, of course. So stuck it in the lift as it seemed really appropriate, and it's kind of really worked. It's driven a lot of curiosity from certainly non-Brits are like, what the hell is this? And there's quite a few on the British side that's sort of like, oh my god, it's whistling Rick Wilson's Hold My Hand Very Tightly. So that was it was a good kind of joke that led to another joke, which was really what a lot of the references in Lumo are about. They're not things to kind of drive the gameplay or really sell the game. They're just a historical reference to stuff that I grew up with, or things that I've done in my career, or things that are important, but also, like a sort of salute to, really the British industry that inspired me to, become a game developer. So it was really nice that so many people kind of let me use, bits and pieces to spice up the game.
And even those jokes that aren't necessarily references or allusions to something, or at least ones that I'm not getting, are a welcome relief. Like, I'm playing this game where I am inundated with poisonous swamp gas at every turn, and then all of a sudden the solution to all that is a giant bar of soap.
Yeah, that's probably the worst joke in it, actually. But soap on a rope, don't drop the soap. Yeah, I don't know. It's some of it's kind of like the when you're doing the AAA stuff, particularly kind of like when you're a British developer, you end up working for a lot of American companies, so a lot of your product becomes Americanized, and it's hard to put your own sort of personality into it. In fact, most AAA games avoid any kind of humor whatsoever, because you're dealing with an international market, and it's completely understandable. I've no problem with that. But I really wanted to make or sort of going forward, Lumo being the start, is I want to make British games. I want to do something that's my, personality, and I laugh way too easily at my own jokes. So once I started kind of doing this, and I'm sort of sniggering as I'm building something that I find quite funny, it just sort of, carries on as it goes through, and it ended up being, Lumo's personality. Lumo really became like the embodiment of a lot of things that I felt were important. And humor's one of them, and I don't like the fact that we tend to forget our developers, our heroes, people that's really made stuff happen, and they're all still around. You can kind of talk to them, you can meet them, you can ask them questions, you can ask to borrow their stuff, and they're all really friendly. And it suddenly started becoming a bit more important to actually, let's try and reference these things. Let's really give a salute to the things that kind of inspired it. And I had a fair bit of help to get rights and stuff along the way. So it's got a quirky personality. It's very British. There are, the references aren't there for everyone. They're really not. If you get some of them, they'll surprise and delight you. I'm the only person that's really gonna get a lot of the references that are in the game, and that's fine, because they don't affect any of the gameplay really. They're just little nods and winks tucked away in the side, and most of them are actually quite subtle. There's a few bigger ones like the Pac-Man maze and things like Marble Madness and stuff like that, but they fitted within the game anyway, and they were part of that kind of environmental story that I was telling, so they're not too incongruous for actually being in there. But yeah, we're making games. It's hard to take it seriously.
So this is a game that continues a legacy of classic gameplay, but it's a kind of gameplay we haven't seen in a long time. Equinox came out in 1993, that's 23 years ago. We have gamers who were not even born back then. So how do you market a game that is such a classic style of gameplay to people who may have never seen it before, and a game that's in a genre that really has no contemporaries, no comparables?
I didn't really care about the lack of contemporaries. That's not important to me personally. It's probably more important to the publisher and the marketers, because they like to have a very distinct message that they can go to market with. But I think Lumo's it's distinctive in that sense. Okay, no one's seen an isometric game for a long time, but it's not like they have no touch point. Diablo's an isometric game, essentially. There are, people can look at the view and they can understand it and they can see what's going on. And the Zelda is probably, a reference people will feel as soon as they're in this environment, because it is actually, quite a close template. If anything, the Zelda dungeons were probably doing the same thing as this genre was doing, 5 or 6 years before. So I don't think it's like going to be an off-putting thing in any way. And the marketing messages that I've seen go out has kind of been like witness the rebirth of the genre. And okay, it's a nice succinct way of putting it, but I doubt many people are actually going to be making arcade adventure games after this. I hope there are a few more, because I quite like the genre, and there's certainly more stuff you could do with it than Lumo has done. But it's the same with anything really. It's the marketing message is only really going to go so far. Having good key art, having it, like you say, shows, PAX East and stuff like that, so people can play it. That marketing message is kind of You know, it's either going to open the door or it's going to be a slight amplifier of something that people are kind of feeling or, you know, getting from the game anyway. And the market being what it is right now, it's, you know, it's hard to kind of get noticed. And if anything, I think our marketing's been quite good for that, because the game has popped up in lots of places. Even if the players are scratching their heads, you know, if you're visible and they're inclined to try it, you know, I think that kind of works from our perspective. But I really didn't want to trade on, you know, hey, this is a remake of Head Over Heels, or this is, you know, Equinox 3, because it's not those things. It sticks to the genre, and it's true to the genre, even to its negative points. You know, it's a remake of a kind of style of game. But I think it's successful in moving it forward, and I think there's a lot of concessions to, you know, modern gamers and modern gameplay expectations, that people feel comfortable with it once they play it, and it's, you know, it looks different, and, you know, maybe where we are right now in the cycle, looking different's a good advantage to have, rather than, you know, looking the same as everyone else's pixel indie game or something.
That's true. The lack of contemporaries may make it hard to set player expectations, but it also means you have a lot less competition, and thus you stand out more easily.
Yeah, games have always sold by how they look anyway. You know, it's like, I can't remember the strapline message for Gears of War. But Gears of War sold because it was, you know, Unreal looking amazing on the 360. You know, and screenshots will probably take it further than the strapline. You know what I mean? So I think Lumo, certainly in places, looks pretty beautiful. Other places is purposefully kind of dull for a reason, but, you know, when the lighting's in full swing and the particle effects are going and you've got all the reflections and stuff, it's a fairly attractive game. It's certainly as attractive as I can make it on my own. So, you know, hopefully it's enough to turn people's eye, and the positive kind of reinforcement from the people who really do like it is always going to help you. You know, I think it's just hard to market anything right now. You know, we live in a world where, you know, we can pretty much get access to any media we want on demand, essentially for free or small subscription price, and games are competing with a lot of that stuff. It's summer anyway, so that's always a fairly flat time to sell a game. So, you know, Lumo's in the same boat as everyone else in that sense, I guess. You know, we're all, you know, shouting and screaming and waving our hands, hoping people notice us.
So you've worked on a lot of titles before this, including titles like Crackdown, Black Hawk Down, Fable 2. When you started working on Lumo, or actually closer to the finish, you said in another interview, "I was a bit stupid to take on Lumo with the cash I had at the start. I should have made something smaller." What would that have been if you had worked on something smaller than Lumo?
See, originally I came to Finland, I was going to set up a satellite studio for Ruffian, and I had a certain level of kind of investment to do that, but there was some business problems back in the UK which, you know, eventually led to me just going, okay, I better do my own thing. But I'd already spent a bunch of the cash that I'd brought over, and originally we were looking at doing this satellite studio for kind of original IP and mobile stuff. So I was about, I don't know, a long way into doing a prototype of an Advance Wars type game for iPad, because I think that was the platform's a really nice fit for just, you know, touching a tank, dragging it to a position, you know, maybe selecting an attack. It's all very quick input. You can play it lying down with the pad on your knee. It would work quite well. But I didn't really want to do the free-to-play market kind of on my own. It's you need a certain amount of investment purely just for user acquisition. So when I started Lumo, the idea was probably to do something about the same size as the original 8-bit games. And I think Head Over Heels had, I might be wrong, but it's somewhere around 150 rooms. Monster Max, I think, has got about 200. And the green light and everything going through that process, that was very much my goal. Is just, I'll do 150 rooms and, you know, that'll be fine. It'll be a small little indie game that we can put up on Steam. But it kind of snowballed. It escalated very, very quickly, because like immediately after the green light, there were, you know, Nintendo were in touch. There were some other publishers in touch. Sony were, you know, offering dev kits and stuff. Xbox came through. I got all the Xbox One kits, and it was like, right, okay, so there's the path to console. You know, this isn't just going to be a small little PC game. I'm going to have to get on with it. And I had to make enough content that it felt like, you know, sort of value for money. And instead of being a 6 month to 1 year little game, it was very quickly became this kind of 2-year game. So that's really what stretched the money. That I had nowhere near enough cash to do 2 years. Would it have been better to stick with the kind of Advance Wars thing? Well, maybe, but the mobile market, it really needs just a certain level of investment. I'd be really struggling to live off of the proceeds for that type of game if it went wrong. So Lumo, even though it was a bigger game and more of a stretch, was probably a safer bet at that time. But again, it was also like my first solo game, so there was a lot of self-education that I had to kind of go through. I could probably make Lumo much quicker now than I could have at the start. So yeah, I think it was the right decision in the end, because I was a lot more invested in Lumo personally as well. The like I say, growing up with this genre, having the ability to make something incredibly British was, that was a real motivation. So I don't think I'll go back to the Advance Wars type thing now. I'll probably leave that prototype to wither and die.
Well, on the topic of games that might have been, as a kid you sketched out ideas for a game that was isometric but involved a time travel mechanic. Could we see that in a future game from you?
Yeah, that's kind of moved. Yeah, so originally when I was playing Head Over Heels, I basically did pencil sketches of another world for Head Over Heels, but the idea with that was you could kind of go backwards and forwards in time. So you could go backwards in time and affect the rooms, which would change the layout maybe of the rooms in the present, so you could kind of do stuff. And yeah, I've always kind of like fancied doing that idea of simple things. You might cut down a load of trees or something, and then eventually a bridge is going to grow there 1,000 years later. Stuff like that. You can I think it's quite flexible. So there's a Metroidvania type game which I've basically kind of sketched out and designed whilst I was doing Lumo. That at the minute has got the time travel stuff in. Whether it keeps that in or not, I don't know. I'll probably have to actually do some actual dev on that and see where it goes. But yeah, it's I don't know. I've got a notebook basically of ideas which I've been sort of passing around or cut and pasting stuff into Google Docs, or there's a whole big bunch of things that I still want to play with. How they coalesce into actual shipping games basically remains to be seen, I think.
So someone who loves old games as much as you and I both do, I have to ask this question. I am a member of the Apple II community over here. I know that computer wasn't as popular in the UK.
Yeah, too expensive.
Right, and to be fair, too expensive over here as well. But there are still people who still use this machine over here, and I'm one of them. I have my Apple II GS sitting on my desk at work. So I have to ask if you still have your CPC or your ZX.
I've got my ZX48K still boxed. That's in the cupboard. The Plus 2's still there. The CPC's still there. I sold my Commodore 64. Under my desk right now, to the left of my dev PC, is my Amiga 1200. That's like in a tower with an 060 and connected to the LAN. I've got every computer that was ever important to me, basically. I've got all my Amiga 500s. I've got a couple of spares for when they die. I've even got all of my consoles. They've got too much kind of personal or sentimental value for me to really get rid of. I don't know. Computers have been a really important part of my life since growing up, and as stupid as it may sound, even that chipped PlayStation 1 that was knocking around in my university lounge for 3 years is covered in dust and beer stains and cigarette ash. I've still got that because it's we had good times on it. I find it, I don't know, they're not friends to me, but you know what I mean. I've had a lot of good experiences with these machines. I would never get rid of them. So
sure, it's a touchstone. I mean, I keep all my video games not in alphabetical order, but in the order in which I purchased them, because I can look back and say, oh yeah, that was sophomore year of college, that was junior year.
That's pretty cool. I mean, yeah. The only thing I regret not keeping actually was the magazines. I was very kind of attentive to, and I kept all of my magazines as a kid, but when I left home, I didn't have anywhere to put them. So it's like, I had a full collection of Superplay, Amstrad Action, Your Sinclair, Nintendo Power, Mean Machines, and, it'd be epic to still have all of those. I really regret getting rid of those. The only machine I didn't have a really close personal link to was the Commodore 64. So I had a big C64 collection, which I kind of got through college and university, and I did get rid of that. But no, everything else I've kept. I didn't keep all the Spectrum games because I kept, like, the ROMs are just more reliable. I mean, trying to run off cassettes now, A, where do you find a cassette player that works? And B, they never worked in the 80s, so trying to expect them to work 30 years later is just not going to happen. But the discs and stuff I've still got. And yeah, I've still got all my Super Nintendo games. I've still got all my NES games. I've actually added to both of those, and I've picked up things that I kind of wanted but never had at the time. You know, I got heavily into getting all the Saturn shooters a few years back, so I managed to, get Battle Garega and all of those types of things because the Saturn was just such a good machine. Yeah, as far as that side goes, I don't have them on the shelf over here because our apartment's a little bit small, but they're all nicely boxed up in storage. So when we get a house, my girlfriend's fully aware that there's about 3,500 games that are going to come suddenly appearing on the walls. But yeah, it's nice to have that stuff. It's nice to still be able to play it as well. It's some of those games is perfectly good as they were today. You still have a good. Imagine getting Bomberman out on the Super Nintendo with 3 or 4 friends. I've still got the multi-tap, it all still works, and it's a riot for, a few people back from the pub. So that kind of stuff just never dies as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, just last year somebody released a Bomberman clone for the Apple II GS, but it was only 2-player, and so somebody else developed an expansion card for the Apple II that lets you plug in 4 controllers.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is phenomenal. It's like, my Amiga is, I've got wireless networking for it. I've got normal networking for it. I've got, compact flash card of 4 gigs. So basically anything that was ever released on the Amiga can go on this one compact flash card. I've got floppy drive emulators for the 8-bit computers and the Amiga. So stick an SD card in. You've got every game that's ever been released. I mean, the fact that people are still making new hardware for these computers is brilliant. And just the community that I will... if I see some of that new stuff that I like, I will pay for it because it's fantastic that people still make it and keep these machines alive. I know it's, our kids are just going, what are you doing? But it's great. It's phenomenal. And they can still, go on the internet. It's amazing.
It is. It makes it easy not only to access all those old games on a single SD card, but also to back up all those floppy disks that you had as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of that in Lumo. There's some arcade machines at the start, and one of them's called Neutrino. And Neutrino is a game that me and some friends started making when I was, I think, 16. And as you expect, we never finished it because, in those days, we had to write an assembly language, and it was all a bit more hardcore. And we were just at that point of leaving school and discovering, pubs and nightclubs and things like that, so it never got finished. But I did have all of the graphics and stuff, the music that we did on the Amiga back then. So the arcade machine in Lumo, that is the original ship that I drew for the game, and the side art of the arcade is a picture that was like the game over screen, and it's got the original logo and stuff on the bezel. So there's a few things like that. It's I had all that stuff lying around, and it was like, right, I'm gonna release Neutrino in some form or another, even though it's 24 years later. And then the guys that I was working with when we were kids saw it, and they were just like, oh right, finally it lives, it's out, it's been released. So yeah, stuff like that's very cool. I think I've kept I've still got a lot of the assembly language stuff I used to write on the Amiga. I've got all the music that I used to do in Pro Tracker, a bunch of pixel art stuff from D-Paint. I've kept all of that stuff. It's actually on my hard drive, right now. I can just pull it straight off the NAS. So yeah, BitRot and digital archaeology, I think, are pretty important in that sense, and I like to have a touch point to what I did on those machines. It's very, very, very cool.
And I think it's wonderful that all this informs Lumo. This is not just a game that you were inspired by as a kid and want to finally realize. It's something that belongs in this long lineage, and whether people recognize it as a standalone game in the year 2016 or as the extension of this history that you are still very much a part of and still very much thrive in, it's just a great game. It's something that brings back to life something that we haven't seen in a long time, but renewed with a modern sense and vigor. And it's just a great package.
Well, Lumo's, people don't really get it because I don't really say about it, but Lumo's effectively, it's a story about me. When I say it's personal, I do kind of mean it. At the start, as you go through the double doors, there's 2 posters on the walls, and they're for an event called Retrovision. And it's basically, it's what we call retro events over here. Loads of people turn up with old arcade machines or old 8-bit computers and consoles. They'll set them up and you can go and you can play the old games. And I went to this, the first 3 or 4 Retrovisions, and this was before I was in the games industry, because it took me about 10 years to actually get a job in it. And it was the first time that I met actual real game developers, and it was very much the stepping stone into me getting into the games industry. So that's on the wall really as a nod to that stuff. It's got Neutrino in it, which is the first game. Ooh Kung Fu was a design for a fighting game that we never finished. Balls Up was a game that I released on the iPhone about 7 or 8 years ago, 2009. And you get sucked into a game. It's a Tron joke, but you get sucked into the game, and it's a metaphor for me of starting out at these retro events, getting sucked into the games industry. The stuff that happens, from that point on is, it's set in this spacey background because you're in a game. It's references about games in a game. It's, it's the whole thing I'm trying to get across, and it's because it's not explained. It's great. Whatever you think it is, that's fine. And I really like having the space for the player to go, okay, we're doing this thing and this is what's happening, and there's no narrative and there's no text because it's up to you. You can take from it what you want, but for me, it's my story of getting sucked into the games industry, and now I'm having a bit of fun making a game that's, referencing games. There's Crackdown stuff in there, you get the agility orb, and that's a direct nod to that franchise that we worked on. It's even got the Ruffian Games logo on the wall underneath it as a hello to all the people that I used to work with. It's very directly tied to me on a personal level in that sense, but like I say, it's no one would ever understand that or get it, but I've done it because it makes me feel good, or it amuses me, or this is finally the first time I get to express me in a game without worrying about a publisher or anything else. I can just go a little bit wild for a while. So yeah, there's a lot of touchstones in it, a lot of touchstones from being a kid to being in the industry to, kind of growing up with games or having heroes or being part of a culture of readers of magazines that were just funny, that had, running jokes. It's just a hat tip to all that stuff. And it was good fun to make because of that, which you need to do when you're solo, because you can have dark days working on your own. So you need to, motivate yourself and lift yourself up and carry on working. So it was good fun.
And I think that's what resonates with the players. Can you remind us where to find this game online?
So Lumo's on Steam. It will be on the PlayStation Network, and I think in 2 weeks it will also be available on the Xbox One store, and PlayStation Vita version will be out as well. So we've got PS4, Windows, Mac, Linux, Xbox One and Vita versions. So go to your friendly digital download store and you should be able to find it.
Any websites or Twitters that you want to plug?
The official Lumo website is play-lumo.com. There's a load more information on there, including videos and director's commentaries, which I'm publishing weekly at the minute. So it kind of explains some of the secrets in the game or what the motivation was for doing stuff, a little bit about my background and kind of why I did it. So that might be of interest to some people just, starting out who want to know more. My Twitter's Corruptor with a K, but I'm not very interesting. You don't need to follow me. Yeah, I think that's it really.
Very good. And show notes to all the resources referenced in this episode can be found online at IndieSider.net/45. Gareth, thank you so much for your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Ken. And I hope to speak to you again soon.